Books for children are often regarded with a kind of nostalgic fondness, and this is true, but rarely are they given the respect that they deserve as real works of art. Storytelling has become a buzzword. If you talk to any J school, B school, law school, or even med school graduate, you'll hear about the importance of telling a story and swaying people to your cause. Case in point, if you're interested, in April, the Wharton Business Development Leadership Program will be hosting a workshop on leadership as storytelling. Stories help us work out life's problems. They boil down a situation to its elements and invite us to put ourselves in someone else's shoes. In doing so, they help guide us through tough choices. They help us familiarize ourselves with how we think and how we tend to align ourselves. Children's books are leading us on this path before we have the metaframe of mind to understand what they're doing for us. But they're couched in a special kind of magic and adventure, the stuff of fun and fantasy, which manages to disguise their importance and their relevance. In a way, they humble themselves even as we exalt them. I started this project because even somewhere like the Kelly Writers House, where participants are given to pursue high art and great literature, I wanted to make sure that children's books had a seat at the table.
So I'm going to be reading on The Velveteen Rabbit by Marjorie Williams, which was my favorite, I think mostly because it was my mom's favorite and the one she would read to me most often, so my favorite by default. My masochistic love affair with tragedy began at a young age. Years before I was listening to Morrissey ad nauseum or crying over the end of Never Let Me Go for the umpteenth time, my favorite source of hurt-so-good catharsis was Marjorie Williams' The Velveteen Rabbit. Though the book ends on a positive note, the experience of reading it was still adequately traumatizing to my 6-year-old self because I identified so strongly with the plight of the titular rabbit. Or rather, I identified on behalf of my own beloved stuffed animal, the unimaginatively named Mr. Bear. When, towards the end of Williams' book, the germ-infested Velveteen Rabbit lies helpless in a pile of garbage waiting to be burned, I couldn't help but imagine my own bear in his stead, weeping and abandoned. I lived in perpetual irrational fear that a sudden bout of scarlet fever would separate us forever, as it had the boy and his rabbit in the story. Hyperbolic emotional devastation wasn't the only thing that endeared the Velveteen Rabbit to me, though. The story also allowed me to imagine a reality in which my stuffed bear was as real as I was, not an object, but a sentient friend, one who loved me as much as I loved him. I thought that perhaps one day, when I no longer needed his constant companionship, he would even turn into a flesh and blood bear and join his polar relatives in the frozen north. Until very recently, though, I had never thought of any possible application of the Velveteen Rabbit outside the realm of nursery toys. In fact, I probably hadn't thought about the book at all in a couple of years, forgetting about it as I got older in much the same way the story's protagonist forgets his old stuffed rabbit once distracted by a new toy and dreams of the seaside. But when, on a whim, I decided to watch Mike Mills' film Beginners this past January, my fondness for William's story returned with a tear-stained vengeance. In Beginners, Ewan McGregor plays a 30-something graphic designer whose elderly father, played by Christopher Plummer, comes out after the death of Ewan's mother. Shortly thereafter, Plummer's character is diagnosed with cancer himself. Around the film's halfway point, there is a scene where the ailing Plummer dances barefoot in the living room with his much younger boyfriend. The scene is silent completely, except for Ewan in voiceover, reading a modified quote from The Velveteen Rabbit. The stuffed rabbit asked, "What is real?" And the rabbit asked, "Does it hurt?" The horse said, "Sometimes." "Does it happen all at once?" "It takes a long time. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your fur has been loved off, and your eyes dropped out, and you get loose in the joints. But these things don't matter at all because you are real. You can't be ugly except to people who don't understand." After watching this scene, the story no longer felt like an antiquated tale meant only for children, but rather a powerful antidote for anxieties about aging and mortality, themes that had, of course, gone way over my puny 6-year-old head. Most of us, I think, are like the Velveteen Rabbit in the end. We wish that we could become real without these uncomfortable things happening to us. My old stuffed bear still lives in the bedroom at my mom's house, which remains an almost untouched fossil of my early adolescence. However, I no longer entertain fantasies that the nursery magic fairy will turn him into a living, breathing, and in retrospect, probably dangerous bear friend. And every time I see him, he seems even shabbier than the last. The bald patches on his stomach, the torn ear, the dangling leg that's been sewn and re-sewn countless times. I can't help but think, though, that there's something beautiful about this exaggerated state of disrepair. As the Skin Horse says, once you are real, you can't become unreal. It lasts for always. Thank you.
When I was very young, my mother told me the story of the Pickle Car. Now, don't feel weird if you haven't heard of the Pickle Car. It'd be bizarre if you had, considering my mother completely made it up. But I assure you, the Pickle Car was the real deal. If I was bored or upset or just tired, my mother, who is English, would begin the familiar tale. I'll condense the salient details. The Pickle Car has no driver. The Pickle Car is a sentient being able to think and do things and talk. In my mind, I imagine the Pickle Car as a person-sized kosher dill, but you're more than welcome to imagine it as a gherkin or a half sour or a sour or whatever you want. It's up to you. The plot of my mother's Pickle Car stories follow a familiar pattern. In the beginning, the Pickle Car was not yet a car, but just a lowly, average, everyday, human-sized pickle. The pickle began to want more. The pickle had dreams. This pickle wanted to be a car. In many ways, my mother had crafted, unconsciously or consciously, a very American story. The pickle had, well, whatever the pickle equivalent is of the American dream. It wanted to be something else, something it wasn't. The general trajectory of these stories, however, was usually more of a mix of American idealism and British realism. This combination manifested in the formula of each episode. Most of the adventures my mother cooked up involved the pickle attempting to gather the parts to become said automobile, a wheel, a gear shift, headlights, and whatever else is in a car, an engine too, I guess. The pickle had a stick shift, being European. In exchange for the required part, the pickle completed a series of tasks, such as going on some adventure, doing some task, whatever. The American aspect of these stories was that the pickle always succeeded. The British aspect was that the success was short-lived. By the end of the story, after a quick drive as the Pickle Car, the poor pickle would have inevitably gotten himself into a pickle and lost all the parts he had laboriously acquired. Stephen Fry describes American humor as involving a down-on-his-luck fellow hilariously achieving his dreams, while British humor as involving the gradual dark downfall of some accomplished figure.
But I wrote about a book that I really like called A Bad Case of Stripes by David Shannon. So I didn't welcome literacy into my life until I was about 6 years old. My parents have never admitted this fact, though. They often like to show off a picture of my 18-month-old self coolly lying on their bed with a Jet magazine, my legs crossed, and my Barney diaper prospering with digest, as it often was. Their little excretory genius, already reading about Tina Turner before her first year. Of course, this act was premeditated, my pretending to read. And most children do it, so I've got no shame. To this day, my siblings deny my access to that memory, but I continued to pretend I was reading up until about kindergarten, when it, to my dismay, became fashionable to read aloud in class. Essentially, I started picking up books because of this pressure to conform, which, if you think about it, is the best kind of conformity I've ever come across. I began this way because, ironically enough, my favorite book from childhood, A Bad Case of Stripes, just so happens to hold on to that same theme of conformity and fearing our own idiosyncrasies. So just in case you never read this fabulous piece of fiction, I'll summarize. The story is about a young girl named Camilla Cream, lover of lima beans. She doesn't eat them, though, for fear of villainous vegetable haters, also known as elementary school children, and she's scared that they're going to judge her. Even though, she could obviously eat them at home and no one would see, but okay, hold on the story. On her first day of school, while she's standing in the mirror, Camilla realizes her skin is striped in the colors of a rainbow, and for a few days, doctors come to diagnose Camilla, but with each decree of her supposed condition, Camilla's skin and body gets worse. So she ends up turning into a pill, grows a tail, eventually melts into her room. And it isn't until she meets, as the book describes, an old woman as plump and sweet as a strawberry, who offers her a very simple cure to become herself again. I'm sure you can guess what the cure was, not to disclose any precious literary details. But when I first read that the lima beans cured Camilla, and it wasn't some magical substance that would turn her into Wonder Woman, I was ill at ease. I assumed my parents gave me this book as a ploy to start eating more vegetables. And how dare they think such things, even though they actually worked. And I wanted to eat lima beans ever since I read the book because I thought I was low in fiber intake and I thought it would make me turn into my room, etc. So certainly my 6-year-old naivete had gotten the better of my suspicions. I was always suspicious of my parents. They were always trying to plot against me. But 14 years later, I'm still blessed to carry a similar amount of naivete and suspicion with me as I find fit. But like the other readers tonight, the central premise of this book has folded itself neatly into my heart. I'm quite proud to admit that I have had and still walk around with a very bad case of the stripes.
I read a lot of books as a child, and I think that they've all shaped me in some way, and some of those ways have been more profound than others. So it's true that I left that program, and I think part of why I left the program is what I learned from children's books, that you should do what will make you happy. So I learned that sometimes quitting is the right thing to do, and moving on to the next thing is the best. I think part of how I learned this was from a book called Max Makes a Million, which is about a dog who dreams of moving to Paris to be a poet. And he leaves his family behind, but he does it, and he's happy for it. From two other books, Frederick and Swimmy by Leo Leone, I learned that everybody has something to contribute, and we just sometimes have to be creative to find it. I don't know if any of you have read those books, but Swimmy is a very small fish who teaches all of the other small fish to band together into a giant fish to scare off the predators. And Frederick is a mouse who is trying to collect things for the winter. Everybody else is collecting food like they should, and they're very irritated because Frederick seems to be doing nothing. But he is collecting colors and words and the warmth of the sun. And when they all run out of food, he delivers these things, and they're all thrilled to experience something other than the winter, the cold gray of the winter. And finally, maybe less profoundly, there was a book called Bill and Pete, which was about a hippo and his best friend and also his toothbrush, who was a bird. Which is a common relationship, I think. But this probably started me on my path to my insatiable love of interspecies best friends, which I think is a magical thing, and maybe not important to how I live my life, but brings a lot of joy to it. The other thing that I read a lot of were Jewish children's books, which most people tell me aren't real when I tell them about my children's books. But the main lesson that I gleaned from them was that rabbis are geniuses and will solve all of your problems. They can resolve family discord. They can help an evil ghost move on. And they can get rid of witches by tricking them into melting themselves. I don't spend a lot of time with rabbis these days, but if there is an invasion of witches, they are the first ones I will call.
And this book, Drizzle, has been just a joy. I will say, this is my prop, but it's my first. I always, you can't pick favorites amongst your books either. I'm most proud of this book. It's a fantasy, and my favorite review of it is Charlotte's Web meets Roald Dahl, and two of my other favorite writers growing up, and it was such a joy. I can't believe, and when I was writing this, I was a 43-year-old woman writing about a farm where it rains every Monday at 1 o'clock, where some of the plants talk. A plant talks to the main character, where the rhubarb tastes like chocolate, and where diamonds pop out of the ground sometimes in tribute to someone on the farm. And I'm writing this, and I'm like, you are out of your minds. You are literally, who thought you're going to be in your mid-40s and you're writing this crazy book? No one's going to read it. You're crazy. And it's been the best publishing experience I've had now out of 3 novels. So I hope, I don't know, I guess I should just say that reading has been, I can't believe I get to make a living, and I feel it's such a blessing. I get to be here and talk to anyone all day long, to my students, to my sons, and to you guys and anybody, just about telling stories and how it's a viable life. I'm thrilled. and grateful. So thanks. Thank you so much.